It's been an exciting year for Linux on the channel, and it included a lot of drama. We're going to be going through all of this, including reviewing some of the stories and news from the past year, including new development, the banning of maintainers and countries, and a massive hack that happened and affected Linux. Let's first start out with some fresh Linux lore. This discussion here between Linus and another Linux developer talks about the criticism of naming conventions for the x86-64 microarchitectures. Linus wasn't too happy about the V1, V2, V3, V4 microarchitecture naming schemes, and instead Linus said to use the CPU ID bits, which provide more detailed information about CPU features. That way we can avoid confusion. In good old Linus fashion, he mentioned that simplification that literally adds complexity, and so no, we are not introducing this idiocy into the kernel. Strong words, of course, and a lot of us sided with the fact that Linus is correct, because the preferred approach here, the CPU ID bits, directly query the CPU features and is less error prone than just making up some type of names. Another thing that I covered over the year and actually made a video called Wayland is taking over Linux, speaking on the growing adoption of Wayland as the default display server protocol for a lot of Linux projects. We went through the advantages, challenges, and recent developments in Wayland, including how it's giving us a simpler architecture, more enhanced security, modern and active development community, and some of the challenges, including compatibility issues, known bugs, and accessibility issues. Over the year, Wayland has seen many improvements and many more projects go over to using Wayland. I go much more into depth in this video if you want to check it out. I'll post a link in the description below. But mainly, we're looking at the pros and cons here over the years and how Wayland has a potential to modernize the Linux graphical stack. I'm quite excited to see further development in Wayland. I know there's a lot of back and forth from the community on the fact that it just doesn't work as well as X11, especially on legacy hardware. A big concern is also the fact that there's no remote desktop support with Wayland. A lot of people want this feature, although with the current state of code, it's not an easy implementation. Speaking of projects and project development, the Fish shell has officially gone to Rust. There will be more about Rust and how it's been changing Linux over the last year, including talking about the Cosmic Rust desktop, but this project took a year in order to completely go over to Rust. The Fish shell now contains a majority of Rust code, right here, right around 71.2%. And the reason this is amazing because it's quite an accomplishment to move an entire project's code base over from one language to another in under a year. And the reason they moved to Rust is mainly pain points, including tooling maintainability and contributor availability, but also challenges came as loss of productivity from current contributors who weren't familiar with Rust have to now deal with the Rust code base. There's a lot of people excited about the modernization and improved developer experience here, hopefully future-proofing the project. But overall, this massive project being moved over to Rust demonstrates significant promise for Rust being used in Linux, as it can showcase the advantages of using Rust, showing a large-scale transition of a code base to Rust. And I couldn't talk about Rust and Linux without mentioning the Cosmic Rust desktop. System76 has pulled off some amazing development this year, including 4 alpha versions of their new desktop environment. While still in development, it offers a polished experience and is currently available on many Linux distributions, including Pop! OS, Fedora, NixOS, OpenSUSE, and many more. But some of the greatest features here that the System76 team has given us is tiling window support, customizable appearance, including exporting and importing theme configurations so we can easily share them. As in March 13th, we started the alpha countdown with the goal to release the first alpha towards the first quarter, which that didn't come to fruition, but in August 26th of 2024. But a little before the August 26th date here, the first alpha was released and people began talking about it, including myself. I spent a lot of time looking at all the features that Cosmic Rust Desktop was giving us and reviewed them in many videos. I am very excited about this new desktop with the potential end of March or April release. We're still yet to see the beta, but I believe that the team is going to come around and start really ramping up things after the new year. We received Alpha 2 in September, which came in with a lot of quality of life improvements. As they keep working on many of the applets and tools available on the Cosmic Rust desktop, the team at System76 has been working diligently. We received Alpha 3 in October 31st of 2024. This update was quite a behemoth as it focused on a lot of bug fixes and performance improvements. In a surprise turn, I did not expect another update of the alpha, but in December 5th, right before the holiday season, we received Alpha 4. I've gone in depth in all of these alphas, so you can check it out on the channel if you want to go back and reminisce, or you haven't seen them, you might want to go check them out yourself Just type in Cosmic Rust Desktop and put SavvyNik in the search, and you will find many videos. Over the year, the Cosmic Rust Desktop has definitely shaped up to be a modern, user-focused environment and clearly has a strong community backing. I'm wishing the System 76 team the best as they continue their wonderful development. But now to move over to some juicy Linux drama. But before we do, make sure to smash that like button for me. And if you've enjoyed the videos throughout the year, I've done more than 100 videos in this year alone. Take a moment and subscribe below so you can follow even more content after the new year. This one is a wild one, as Kent Overstreet, the lead developer of Bcachefs, was banned from contributing to the Linux 6.13 kernel cycle due to the code of conduct violation involving multiple violations. We're going to go briefly through the timeline. Somewhere in August, a developer, Mikhail, submitted a patch to remove some memory allocation flag that affected Bcachefs, and in September, the discussion escalated as Overstreet went back and forth with Mikhail as the exchange took place here between the two, ultimately leading to the Code of Conduct board on Linux banning Kent from being able to contribute. Dating back to November, towards the end of November, Overstreet said that Linus declined his pull request as he was trying to resolve the issue with the Code of Conduct committee. Kent did eventually apologize as things did get heated and explained himself, but this wasn't the first time we had drama from Kent over the year. Not only did Kent get suspended, but him and Linus got into a very heated debate as Linus himself got fed up over the Bcachefs project, and Kent. Basically, Linus criticized Kent for poor development practices, including submitting untested patches and not working well with others, which issued in an ultimatum. A, play better with others, or B, take your toy and go home. Those are the choices signed off Linus. This is quite the ultimatum, as it showed how integrating experimental projects that were highly based on one developer can prove challenging. As Linus initially said, I was hoping and expecting that Bcachefs being mainlined would actually help the development. It has not. You're still basically the only developer. There's no real sign that that will change, and you seem to feel like sending me untested stuff that nobody else has ever seen the day before the next RC release is just fine. Hopefully this year we see more development from Kent, but at a slower, more tested pace. I know they're excited to get Bcachefs into the kernel, but clearly there's a lot of roadblocks in order to do that. Moving on to some notable releases, Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, the Noble Numbat, got released to us with new features including an updated Linux kernel and a lot of packages, toolchain upgrades, but overall an underwhelming update this year, which is fine because this is the latest long-term support edition of Ubuntu. We don't want to see a bunch of changes, but of course it's a big deal to get the long-term support edition. Another notable and new release is RHEL AI, which RHEL claims they want to open source AI and give a platform for developers to use AI on. Now we got to understand that more than likely this is a marketing move. They just want to position themselves to be ahead of the game when it comes to using AI on their systems and giving an environment to enterprise level companies so they can profit on the support. Still a big move by Red Hat introducing this new enterprise level Linux AI distribution. RHEL also decided to collaborate with Microsoft by officially announcing a supported distribution on the Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL. While this seems to streamline the enterprise workflows and bridges Windows to Linux environments, it doesn't come without criticism that Red Hat is aligning with Microsoft's corporate strategies and fragmenting Linux even more. This was an interesting turn of events during the year. We'll see how this one plays out. Another wild public dispute that happened in open source Linux projects this year was between a laptop vendor called Malibal and Coreboot, which is an open source firmware project. This one's kind of hilarious as it ended in a ban of an entire country and a couple of US states, as Malibal was definitely not happy with the Coreboot project. We're going to have some other wild stories we're going to cover soon that happened over the past year. But in this one, Malibal accused Coreboot consultants and contributors of inflated prices, poor communication, unethical practices, and a terrible time trying to port over Coreboot to their laptops. The goofiest part here is they aired all their grievances in a blog post criticizing individual consultants, banning one country, banning 2 US states, and it's all in their updates. We have not read through update 3, so we're going to get into that in just a moment. I just want to talk about Coreboot's response real quick. All they did was deny any contractual obligations, calling Malibal's claims false. While the broader Linux community debated over the professionalism of both sides, many noted Malibal's extreme response was completely unprofessional and criticizing the handling of this entire dispute. So let's read update 3 because I haven't read this yet either, so I'm quite excited. Update 3. We haven't read Coreboot's response and never will. Go figure. that project is trash and doesn't deserve anyone's attention. If they claim our account of what happened is in any way false, they are lying. God can strike me dead if anything we said isn't true or we have left out a single relevant fact or detail. What these Coreboot consultants and leaders did is simply indefensible. Anyone who sides with them should hang their head in shame. Wow, some more strong words there. I get that the Malibal team, well, seemingly at least one person over there, is very passionate about this. I just don't think that this was a good way to air their grievances publicly online. If anything, let me know what you think about this update. Anyways, we're going to keep continuing as there's more drama to hit on. As this next one can be a reason it may be time to switch to Linux if you're still using Windows. Microsoft's new recall feature, which is set to debut on Windows 11 Copilot Plus PCs, was quite drama-filled over the year. While they marketed it as innovation, we got amazing blog posts such as this one called "Stealing Everything You've Ever Typed or Viewed on Your Windows PC is Now Possible with 2 lines of code inside of Copilot's Plus recall disaster." And quite a disaster it is, as it raised significant privacy and security concerns due to taking screenshots every few seconds and then having unclear opt-out options and even trying to store the data in SQL-like databases, which were completely unencrypted. And the main argument here for switching to Linux is a clear lack of transparency and control and even respect for your privacy. Microsoft's handling of this recall feature is a symptom of a larger issue. An operating system designed to benefit only profits and a company is coming at the expense of autonomy and trust from their own users. Linux offers freedom, transparency, and control of your privacy and data. If you're frustrated with Microsoft and Windows direction at this point, switching to Linux may be the alternative. Even though Microsoft recall is ruining Windows for all, I'm done talking about them, as we got 2 of the biggest events in Linux coming up, all filled with drama. But first I want to talk about a few releases. Some from my channel, others from projects, because we got a wonderful replacement from Windows. Zorin OS 17.2 is a wonderful alternative to Windows. It's ideal for beginners who are transitioning, and the Core Edition here is free, while the Pro Edition offers an even more premium desktop layout that mimics Windows 11, Mac OS, Chrome OS, whatever you want. I did a complete review of the latest and greatest in Zorin, and I do think it's a great way to transition to Linux from Windows. I'm glad this year we got an updated version of Zorin, and I have been suggesting this as an excellent choice for new Linux users. We'll keep watching this development. Hopefully, we'll see some in the new year. Try to use the Zorin Connect feature, as it is an integrated app that helps you work between your computer and Android devices with an encrypted connection. Another big deal, at least for me, is a Linux project that I started this year, which was the Moist Claw Machine. I work with Charlie from Penguin Zero, or some of you know him as Moist Critical, to set up a remotely controlled claw machine that people could play via Discord, both integrated with Twitch and YouTube. This project was very successful and was completely Linux based. Everything exists on Linux, including the hardware controls, the database, the APIs that communicate between the different backends and front ends and databases. It was a wonderful project that I got involved in. I'm also excited to announce that very soon we'll be bringing this thing back to life. So you wouldn't want to miss this. I'm going to make another video about this whole deal in a little bit, but I'm super excited to work back on that project and show off Linux and how wonderful open source can be, because you can get awesome projects like this. Super excited about this. Charlie has completely had his mind blown about the Linux project for the remote claw machine, and I'm excited to bring it to even more people here in the coming months. Speaking about Linux projects and development, I released a C++ course for Linux specifically, as I wanted people to be able to master development and development on Linux. A lot of people have taken the course at this point. It's completely free on YouTube. You can check it out. I'll put a link in the description below, but I'm very happy that even to this day, people are still watching my videos on how to program, as I am passionate about many different things. And over the years, I've loved doing videos like that. I don't do too many of them because I have my own projects that I get into. I'm hoping to show off more of those projects in the coming year and diving into some of the other things that you can do with Linux. Hopefully we get some Raspberry Pi here soon, but the course is doing very well. On the channel itself, we've seen over 50 million impressions and over 5 million views. Those numbers are staggering, and I want to thank every one of you who is subscribed for following along, as this has been an amazing year. Another interesting development in Linux is the equivalent of the blue screen of death coming to Linux. This mainly pertains to systemd and the Linux DRM, Direct Rendering Manager, kernel component. The aim here is to provide diagnostic information during critical system errors. That way we can get better troubleshooting as Linux users. The benefit here is just the visible error, potential QR codes for debugging and prevention of hardware damage. Hopefully this will make it easier for us to diagnose panics from the kernel instead of looking through complex log files. Although this is still a bit experimental, it has been released, but I'm really hoping they change the color from blue to something else to distinguish ourselves from Windows completely. In other big news, a well-known project called Neofetch was completely discontinued as a project on GitHub. The lead open source developer has chosen to stop contributing to the project and has officially archived the project. This all happened on April 26, 2024. Now the project is only read-only and is publicly archived. It's sad to see this project go, but there's going to be plenty of forks as there's over 1.6 thousand forks of the whole entire project already made. And right before we get to the juiciest drama, including Russia getting banned and a lot of Rust maintainers wanting to step down from developing on Linux, we need to talk briefly about how much Linux has grown over the last year. At the beginning of August, we received an article that said we had some good news on the statistics for Linux use, as it hit an all-time high in July 2024. Linux was at an adoption of 4.45%, mainly due to Steam OS, allowing us to play on Linux-based devices, which is really exciting. We can see a trend of Linux getting used on desktop over the years, all the way starting in 2009, and you can see how much percentage has been adopted here. We're not including servers in this exactly, but it started way down at around 0.5% and now is right at that 4.5% in 2024. As it is still well below other operating systems, I will say over the years, what's most fascinating is that operating system of choice, Windows, has significantly come down over the years. Since 2009 to 2024, we've seen over a 20% decrease in the overall market share worldwide. That is a staggering amount, as every year OS X, or now known as macOS, and Linux keep steadily climbing while Windows keeps steadily falling. It'll be very interesting to keep following that stat. Over the year, we've seen a lot of debate and discussions acknowledging the fact that it's going to be hard to adapt Rust into the Linux kernel, with even one maintainer, Whetstone, leaving and removing themselves as the maintainer of the Rust for Linux project, citing non-technical nonsense that's been frustrating him. As far as Linus Torvalds goes, his views on the integration of Rust into the Linux kernel seem to be positive despite the contention among maintainers and contributors. He seems to believe that Rust's inclusion is valuable for improving safety and modernizing the Linux kernel, and even if it's a long-term process, he is willing to go through it. So what exactly was happening with Rust in Linux? Well, the Linux community is facing significant challenges and debates over the inclusion of Rust in the kernel and the state of Rust developers, as some have just been completely tired of all the back and forth without being able to focus on the actual development of things. That's why Whetstone stepped down. In short, they removed themselves as the maintainer of the Rust for Linux project, which was a blow to the Rust for Linux community, as they found themselves lacking the energy and enthusiasm I once had to respond to some of the non-technical nonsense, so it's best to leave it up to those who still have it in them. While Whetstone's frustrations were vented, so were people from the Asahi Linux team, stating a subset of C kernel developers just have seemingly determined to make the lives of the Rust maintainers as difficult as possible. They don't see Rust as having value and would rather see it go away, stating that some of the friction here is maintainers are blocking code from being put into Linux, saying you should just do what other drivers do, which all led into the archetypes of Rust Linux developers and maintainers. This is an interesting read as they break it down into varying different archetypes and how Linux development and contribution is fragmented. An interesting read. Rust for Linux maintainers are clearly not happy, although there have been quite a few big wins, as we saw Fish Shell got ported over to Rust. The Cosmic Rust desktop has made significant strides over the last year. There's a lot of new open source projects exploring Rust, and it doesn't seem like it's going away. We'll continue to watch development in all this, as a significant security breach happened this year involving the XZ utilities. A backdoor was discovered, potentially compromising almost every Linux system. The backdoor could have enabled remote code execution via OpenSSH, though it was mostly contained into bleeding edge distributions. Think Fedora Rawhide, Debian testing, Arch Linux. Anyways, the breach highlighted the weaknesses of supply chain security and also showcased the rapid response and collaboration of the open source community in identifying and mitigating this issue. I've read through this post a few times, the how bad is the XZ hack on Hacker News, as It supplied a lot of information on what exactly had happened, but by far the most comprehensive article on this is on GitHub under the xz-backdoor.md, and it goes directly in how this vulnerability could have been used in a detailed breakdown of how things happened. Now, we're not going to go into all that, but it was one of the major stories of the year. Basically, versions 5.6 and 5.6.1 of the XZ compression library, also called liblzma, were the ones that were compromised. The backdoor allowed attackers with private keys to execute arbitrary commands via OpenSSH. The person who discovered this was Andre Freund. Through a lucky set of events, just saw some unusual behavior with high CPU usage while using XZ. The wild part was it came stealthily through a maintainer who had been submitting code for years, gaining the trust of the main maintainer, and eventually submitting a pull request which contained the hack. Some people even say that this was a foreign threat actor, as it's really hard to execute anything else like this without involving multiple people, especially with such time and devotion in order to get this hack passed and undetected. We still don't know exactly who did this, but the user who signed off on it was Jian Tan. Can you believe that some actor here spent almost 3 years building trust within the XZ Utilities community and project, and then even becoming a co-maintainer, all to introduce this malicious code? Infiltrating open source in an unprecedented way. We haven't even seen this. Linus Torvalds even himself had to speak on this. He emphasized the importance of trust in the open source community, noting while there are some breaches and concerns like this, that the fact that we're such a collaborative and open community, the protection is the fact that we had swift detection and we could easily resolve this issue, citing that the XZ Utilities backdoor was discovered in under a month after actually initially using the attack. This was such a big deal that it also has its own wiki article on it. If you want to go review this, I suggest checking out the wiki, as it received a CVSS score of 10.0, the highest possible score. Thanks to Andres Freund for finding the backdoor. Let's hope that we don't get something else like this next year. And the last thing I want to discuss is the removal of Russian developers from the list of official maintainers, as international sanctions took place this year. In a weird turn of events, as initially in the end of October, Greg Crone Hartman, a leading Linux kernel developer, submitted a patch removing approximately a dozen Russian developers, which cited various compliance requirements. It was very vague what had happened here initially. As it mentioned, individuals could be reinstated, but didn't necessarily specify why they were removed. Well, this all changed as Linus had to respond after much backlash from not only the community, but of course, Russian contributors, being very uncertain of what was happening. The response here was, okay, lots of Russian trolls out and about, and states that the decision is not getting reverted. And Linus also briefly touches on the fact that it has to do with sanctions. After a lot of back and forth and just guessing on what actually happened, we finally received some clarity when James Bottomley, another kernel developer, finally clarified what was going on. Basically, the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control Regulations told the project that it wanted to impose some restrictions. In this email, we see, please accept all of our apologies for the way that this was handled. And it was handled in a very weird, as we didn't really see a transparent reason for the banning of Russian accounts. A summary of the legal advice the kernel is operating under is, if your company is a US OFAC SDNN list, subject to an OFAC sanctions program, or owned or controlled by a company on that list, our ability to collaborate with you will be subject to restrictions and you cannot be in the maintainer's file. So we finally understood why, and was handled so poorly because of the lack of transparency, delayed communication, and not really sticking to the open source principles. This all grouped to make this a bigger deal than it probably actually was. But hopefully we don't get something like this in the new year. Now, I can't get back to all the main points that happened in Linux this week, as it was a massive year for Linux. I do want you to post some of the moments that you felt were big in Linux over the last year in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you. It's been a wild ride, and I'll continue taking us through this ride in the new year. Happy holidays to all. And take a moment to hit that like button for me. You made it to the end of the video. You are a true fan. And if you did, and you aren't subscribed, take a moment to subscribe below, as you clearly like this type of content and you wouldn't want to miss more coming up in the new year. Catch me in a great community on Discord, and I'll catch you in another video. Thanks for watching. Linux can be hard to understand, but I take the most commonly used terms, commands, and subjects in Linux and I break them down into simple to read documents, including Linux terms, flashcards, a checklist, a cheat sheet, and a mind map. And if you're ready to level up your Linux experience and knowledge, go to learn.savvynik.com now and get access to these sheets.